Yo, welcome back to the Reflection Podcast. This is Imani. We're back with another episode. I'm extremely happy today. Unintentionally, I don't even know why I'm so happy, but I am. I'm filled with joy, with love, with peace, and with some type of hope. Now, this episode might have gave me a lot of grief this week because I was back and forth with it. So many emotions. I tried to disqualify myself, as in I did not want to be rejected by this episode, but here we are. I'm doing it. I have titled this episode Mosaic Masterpiece, and a mosaic is a wonderful, skillfully crafted work of art from broken pieces, whether it be stone, tile, or glass, but it is a bunch of different broken pieces that creates a different artwork. Now, I called it masterpiece because that's what God calls me. Ephesians 2:10, a version of it says that I'm God's masterpiece, created to do good works for him. So, there we have it. Mosaic Masterpiece is where you get the title. I guess the question that I'm going to ask, do you think that your story should disqualify you from being used by God? Now, I'm going to touch on that question at the end of the episode, but that is just something that you should think about. Maybe write it down, write a list to a lot of things that you probably have done, and yeah, do that. But I'm going to hit on that at the very end to just discuss some things. Now with me, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag really early, just so we can get into it, because there's a lot to say. There's a lot of information that I want you to retain, and I just pray that you listen with an open heart and an open mind, the willingness to learn, but also the willingness to be taught to love in a different aspect, as you probably haven't or probably have. But a small disclaimer, you probably don't want to listen to this episode around a child. And that's okay, but because it is filled with a lot. And also another thing, if you have trouble listening to people or having an open mind, are judgmental, I would not recommend listening to this. So you probably should cut it off now while you're ahead. But this is not to say anything against you. I love you, but I need people who are going to listen with an open heart and an open mind to listen and, to kind of receive, because this will challenge a lot of opinions, ideas, and theology. With all that being said, let's take the cat out of the bag. By society's standpoint of who I am in life, I am considered to be gay, a homosexual, a lesbian, things of that nature. That is what they would label me as. And I'm pretty sure people who have ever probably wondered why I wore boy clothes or why I acted the way I acted, there's your answer. It's such a hard to probably even pull that out. Why? Because I'm a minister. People know that. It's so crazy. But before you just kind of turn me off or try to close down, let's just talk about where it began. Let's just go to the beginning. So in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve. Now, there's a saying for what I just said. God didn't create Adam and Steve. We get it. We understand. That is not a tactic. That is not a saying that you should say to people who live the gay lifestyle. Why? Because it doesn't work. It is not something that they listen to and take heed to, because basically it's just saying that God doesn't love them and God didn't create them. Anyway, so I just want to put it out there. Stop using that. It's not helpful. It's not a tactic that works. But anyway, God created Adam and Eve. And at that moment in chapter 3 of Genesis, this is where sin entered into the world. Eve was manipulated and deceived by the enemy, by Satan himself, to eat of the fruit of the very thing that God told them not to do. But she was deceived and she ate it anyway, and she gave it to Adam and he ate it. So they both was deceived by the enemy, quite like how he deceives and manipulates us into doing what we naturally desire to do. So that's where it entered. Once it entered, God calls out, basically asking where they at, because they tried to hide. They tried to cover themselves and tried to hide in that instance. And God was like, where y'all at? And they came out telling him, "Did y'all eat from the fruit?" Da 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 da. And they was like, "Yeah, but it was because of the girl that you created for me." But then the girl was like, "Nah, it was from that snake that was in the tree." Like, they started shifting blame, um, for why sin entered, or why their actions were the way that they were. And that in that moment, when they knew that they did something wrong, they tried to hide, they tried to cover themselves, but God sent an answer right where they messed up at. God sent the answer to the problem of sin right in that moment. Genesis 3:15 is the first gospel given that basically solved all of our problems. Now, God did curse the man and the woman. Here we are, 2020. Women, we have periods and things of that nature, but hey, we have Eve to blame for her mishaps, and that is a conversation that I probably have in heaven one day. Anyway, once God cursed them and things like that, he gave him an answer, but what was so clear and unique was that God covered them in a different way. They tried to cover themselves with fig leaves and things like that. God covered them with animal skin, symbolizing that something had to die in order for them to be properly covered. Now let's fast forward to my life. At the age of 5 years old, I was introduced to pornography, and that is something that I still deal with almost 19 some years later. Super crazy, but pornography was introduced in my life at a very young age. So it is something that has a hold over me that me and God are still working out. But anyway, that's where it was introduced. I saw a man and a woman having sex. I wanted to recreate it. My lustful desires kicked in at that very moment. And I actually did start recreating it, whether it was at school, at home, little boys, little girls, so crazy at the age of 5. And I vividly remember, those moments. So crazy, but I remember them. But fast forward, that did not make me gay, but that is one thing that happened, of where lust entered or sexual desires entered by any means. But then the second thing that happened that was a highlight was that my father wasn't around, and then I was graced with another dad, but he also was not around to love me the way that I felt that I needed to be loved, or that I should have been loved. So I was rejected by two men in my life. I was longing for a sense of love. I was longing to be treated like a princess. I was longing for something that I was not getting. And that time, I just witnessed that I was getting all of this love and things like that from women. I've always lived with women. I always have been around women. It's so many women. Their presence are so strong in my life. I have 6 great aunts and 1 uncle. You see how the balance is just off. My dad wasn't there. The dad that I had wasn't there. I had 1 uncle and 1 grandfather. And yeah, that was it. So all I saw was the love of woman, how a woman could do whatever needs to be done to make a means to even still love me at the end of the day. So that's all I saw, and that's all I knew. And the fact that my dad and my Grace dad wasn't there, I decided to take on that role of protecting myself, making myself feel wanted and loved, and also the fact that I felt I could do it better to take on that persona. So there you have it, of why I dress the way that I do. But all that was still at the age of 8 or 9. And I never really actually opened up to anything. But that's where these pillars were at. And by the time I got to middle school, I realized that I was not developed at all. And I probably didn't even have to wait to middle school, about 5th or 6th grade, to understand that I wasn't developed. I had a bird chest. I was skinny. I was small. I was the smallest girl. And that boys at that time, like girls who had breasts, come on, man. Like, they had a little figure. They had something going for them. I happened to not be that person. So I was already looked at as being a little boy in their eyes. Even though I wore girly clothes and things like that, I was not looked at as somebody desirable from boys. And that really hit home in middle school. So I had an insecurity, and then I started taking on the fact, oh, you my girlfriend, that's who you are, blah, blah, blah. I started saying all of that in middle school, which is so crazy. And I never really solidified anything in middle school, but those thoughts, all of those pillars started rushing back in that one moment, especially being denied by yet again or rejected yet again because of who I am. By the time I got to high school, it was completely over. Uh, Everything of how I felt came rushing in. I started to change my clothes. I started to change my appearance, how I acted, how I wanted to make other people feel just because of the lack of how I felt growing up. This is that. So in 2010, I came out as gay. Never really actually saying, oh, I'm a homosexual or anything. I just came out in my actions. By like 2011, that's when my mom found out. Never, because I actually had a big coming out story, because I didn't. But she found out through a picture on Instagram of me kissing another girl. And she came outside because we was at my grandparents' house. We always playing. But she called my name in a way I never heard it before. And I was a little scared. And she confronted me and basically kind of devastated at that moment. And my heart broke too, but at that moment I didn't care to hear anything. A pastor had pulled up simultaneously to have that talk. It just was so overwhelming, but I guarantee you that conversation went in my ear and went out the other. Didn't stick. Why? Because I felt just like they were coming for something that none of them, or even me at that time, understood. So it just was a bunch of wasted words. And yeah, that was my story. So here we are, 2020. Yeah, still living the lifestyle. Not to say I'm still living it the way that I was years ago, because I'm completely not nowhere near living it out, but this is just where I am. So I guess you have the whole background of my story, but let's just talk about where God entered in and the gospel of how people misconstrue God's viewpoint on not just my sin, but just sin in general. So let's talk about that now as we move closer and closer into answering the question that I initially asked. So in 2017, which was 3 years ago, where me and God had an open conversation. It was such a hard conversation because at that moment in my life, I was at the lowest, where I wanted to kill myself because of all the hurt, rejection that I felt, that I was unloved, that I was going to hell. Like, so many thoughts rushed in my head at 2017. I actually was going through a really, really bad breakup at that time. And yeah, I just didn't feel the need to still live. I didn't feel the need to be used. I didn't feel anything. And having that conversation with God, high as a mug, just wanting a sense of belonging somewhere, a sense of love that I never felt, a sense of just understanding why I was created the way that I was, with the flaws that I have, with the sin that I was embellished in. I just did not understand, and I feared for my life. And so many things happened to me, like all these different car accidents that I did not die in. And that conversation allowed me to understand God was not going to allow me to die dead. He was not going to allow me to die a death dead in my sin. That's how that conversation went. And by the end of that conversation, I had gave him my yes. Now, when we had that conversation, God called me to himself first. God did not call me to say, hey, you got to stop being gay and then we can work with it. No, God just called me to himself. He called to love on me, to care for me, to protect me, to shield me from things that I just did not know that I was in. And that moment of him calling me to himself, he called me to preach. And it was so wow, because I'm like, God, that ain't my life. That's not who I am. I'm not about to do that. One, because I'm not about to be rejected by the people who call you by your name. Nah, that's not it. You can have it. I just want to be in communion with you. Now, here we are, 2020. I am a minister. I did not win, as you can see. But God called me to himself, and at that moment I gave him my yes. I gave him my heart. I did not turn over and say, "Here, all right, I'll do this if you allow me to stop being gay, or if you allow me to not be an alcoholic, if you allow me to not be a manipulator." We did not have a conversation like that. We had a conversation about who I was created to be, why and how he can use all these things together. We had that conversation, and he initially greeted me with love. That was how that conversation went down. Now, fast forward, I did not outwardly come out with the call or the fact that I gave God my yes all the way back in May, I believe. It was all the way in November, the 26th, when I openly said that God called me to preach, but also that I wanted to be reborn or baptized for the second time. But December 17th, 2017, I got baptized. And in that moment, I felt a release. I felt a complete heart change. I felt so much different. Like, my friends were there. Stoney actually took a picture of me crying before I even got baptized. But my life completely shifted that day. Imani, the one who was born into sin, as we all are, she died that day. And new life took a hold that very same day too. So with that being said, sanctification and justification can happen instantly. God marks you with his spirit once you are born again, or once you give him your yes. You have been redeemed. You have been made holy. You have been made righteous. Like my guilty stains, my filthy rag, all of that was washed clean because of me just being reborn, me just accepting Christ as Lord over my life, giving him my yes, giving him everything of me, surrendering it all. That's what happened. And this is how Imani's sinful nature died. Now, sanctification does not happen overnight. And I want people to know that. That is not something that just because I got baptized, no, my clothes did not change. Just because I got baptized, everything of how I thought or how I walked, all of that did not change overnight. But what did change was my roots, not the fruit. And it's so evident because people get upset and say that I couldn't be used. People say that I should be casted to hell, that God destroyed the whole city because they were all gay. Now let me clear that up. He did not destroy a whole city because they were gay. He destroyed the whole city because they were wicked and self-righteous. Basically, everything of how they live was in regards to their wickedness, and basically like they was cool without God. That's why he destroyed a whole city. I'm glad we had that conversation. But anyway, I just was so shamed by so many people, and it kind of scared me, and just like, man, I don't want to ever deal with God in that way, because if he don't love what he created, what's the point? But those are all of the thoughts that I had to be right. I had to fix myself before I even came to God. But as I said, our first conversation, he greeted me with so much love. It spared my life. So it comes down to the point that, yes, people look at the fruit, but God looks at the root. People hate the fruit. God hates the root. And God does a change that other people can't see or other people can't understand. It's so crazy because love covers a multitude of sin. God loved the world so much that he gave his only son to die on the cross. Is because of love, of why I'm here today, of why I still could be used. It was because of grace that I still am being used. It is because of his mercy that, counteracts everything that I did wrong, because it was nothing that I could have ever done for myself to make me right or in right standing with God. It was everything of what he did. Now, the fact that God changed my root December 17th, 2017 does not solidify that, my fruit immediately changed. No, because God is doing the groundwork. He's still doing the groundwork, whether people see it or not. God changed my roots that day. So my mindset changed, my heart changed. Everything that I thought to do, or the lifestyle that I was living, just because it was a desire to me. It was how it was given. I was deceived or manipulated for so long, of me trying to cover myself, of me trying to hide from the presence of God. It was so much that I was trying to do by myself. He was like, but you cannot cover yourself the way that I can. This is the reason why I sent myself to die, so I could cover you properly. Like I said in Genesis, they try to cover themselves, but God covered them properly. God sent himself here so he can cover us properly. So that happened. My roots changed. Maybe not my fruit just yet, but my root has changed. And I pray that you can see that. But I can give a quick story of what kind of solidifies this whole conversation. God, when he healed the lame man for him to walk again, he looked at the man and told him that his sins are forgiven. Now the Pharisees said that that's blasphemy. Only God can forgive sin. And God, being the G that he is, he looked at him and said, would it just be easier for me to tell him get up and walk, or that his sins are forgiven? Which one would you rather me do? Because I can do both. But in the instance, I'd rather deal with the root of his problem, which was sin. And I told him that his sins were forgiven. But anyway, you need something to see? Sir, get up and walk and pick up your bed and go back home. Don't stop along the way. Go back home with your mat and tell them basically what I just did. So I say this to say, as many people that tried to say that God could never use me, God could never basically use me in a massive or powerful way because they perceive my sin to be that great, or that bottom level, that I'm the worst of the worst. Check this out. God is at my root. God forgave me for my sins. God forgave me for everything that I did. And he's still doing a greater work. He's still seeing the work that he started into completion of time. He's still using all of my broken pieces to create a Mosaic masterpiece. Now, for all those self-righteous people who don't believe that, who want to be the Pharisees, would you rather God just say, oh, I'm delivered from being gay? Or would you just rather him deal with the root of the problem? Now, it's not to say that, oh, if God just took away being gay, if he never changed my root, I still would be a liar, manipulator, a cheater, a thief, someone who had evil and wicked thoughts, somebody who probably attempted murder. Like, I still would be all of those people, or all of those things. But just because it's well hidden does not take away from the fact that they were there. So I have one sin that's inevitably, crazily seen. You see it on the outside. But the thing that happened was that my roots changed, and that there was an answer for me, that God covered me through it all. Why? Because I gave him my yes willingly, to just submit to his authority. So I just challenge everybody who just heard this whole story to look at a person who may be different from you, to just love on them. Love on them in a way that covers them. Love on them to just allow them to see that there is some type of hope, that there is an answer. Be the Bible that a person probably reads. Like, that you might be the only Bible a person ever reads. Just be that. Show them the godly love. Why? Because the same spirit that resides in me resides in him, resides in you. And love is the source of it all. So I challenge you to just love somebody. And what I take from that story is the fact that God told him to pick up his mat and go back. This is me picking up my mat. This is me sharing my testimony, or just sharing my story of where I am and where I will be. I am created as God's masterpiece. I am on the potter's wheel. God is still doing the work. He's still recreating, shifting some things, detailing some things. But the thing that really changed was the root of where I was, and he planted me into him. I'm in his hands. I'm in good standing. Everything that is changing in my life, my eyes have been changed. My heart has been changed. My thoughts have been changed. I am no longer the same person, and it's so evident. But I'm just sharing a story that I pray gives him glory at the end of the day, because he's the only one that saved me from all of this. Now, back to the question. Do you think that your story should disqualify you from being used by God? It shouldn't. because it didn't stop God from using me. God uses me in a mighty way to inspire people, to shake up some things, to challenge some things, but God is using me because God loved me, and he was like, there's no other person that can do what you were created to do. Now, biblical content. Moses was a murderer. God still used him to deliver his people from slavery. It's kind of crazy that we're dealing with oppression and stuff still to this day. But God used a murderer to do that. God used Saul, conversion from Saul to Paul, someone who used to kill Christians or have them killed, to be a great apostle, to get other people that he used to kill but to save their lives. He used Rahab, a prostitute. Someone might call her a hoe, but hey, he used her. She's now in the line. She was in the line of Jesus. Like, God used Abraham, somebody who was a liar, somebody who manipulated people. He used him to be the father of many nations. Like, this list can go on of imperfect people. But being imperfect is perfectly fine because you are designed for an audience, a targeted audience, whoever it may be. Now, I put out my whole story, or the main parts of my story, crucifying, what could have been my reputation. But hey, I don't care. When it comes down to being used by God, God is going to use this story by his means to capture in the people who thought that being of gay or being a murderer, being a thief, being someone who cheats, any of that nature, the rejects. That's my audience. I am called to the rejects. Why? Because there are so many people who just try to disqualify you because of your sin, because of the things you did, or the things you have done, the things you still do. Check this out. Everybody sins every day. We are still a filthy rag in God's eyesight, but the thing that covers us is the fact that he sees his son. So he sees perfection when he sees us. He still sees someone that he can use. Don't let other people deter you away from that truth. God sent an answer when Adam and Eve sinned. He sent an answer right at the beginning of time. Now that answer manifested when God died on the cross. But he was like, still, it doesn't end there. I'm going to send you a helper. I'm going to mark you with my spirit that is going to guide you until the day I return. This is where we are. And this is why it's still hope. You still can be used. So never disqualify yourself because of your story, because he didn't disqualify me. I love y'all. I pray that this helps somebody. I pray that this opens somebody's eyes into how to love a person, because they're people overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the power of their testimony. So this is me speaking. But I just pray that, you know how to love. Your love increases, and that God increases the spirit that's inside of you to do his great work. I love y'all, man. Every day above ground, there's always a reason to smile. If you woke up this morning, check this out. You should have a smile on your face. Be blessed.